Hello everybody and welcome back to Let's Play ChäoS. Like last time, this is going to be a slightly shorter part, sticking a lot closer to the sort of timer that I set, which is a half hour. But let's go ahead and get started again. A flash of light shot through my sight. By the time the flash died down, the grotesque wounds I'd seen on her wrist had utterly vanished. I collected my disordered breaths. I gnawed hard at my lip. Nanami massaged her own unbandaged hand.
青あざ、だいぶ消えてくれたな。最初はすごく腫れてたんだよ。
I didn't know whether or not she spoke the truth. Certainly, she didn't have any injuries, but they'd been there before. I didn't understand anything anymore, nor did I want to think about it. I leaned my neck back against the sofa again.
Nanami.
I spoke to my sister, to the female who may or may not have been here, or excuse me, who may or may not have been her, without turning my gaze on her.
お前が本物でも偽物でもどっちでもいいよ。
Now I sought only one thing.
僕を殺してくれないか。
Oh. Okay, last part could have gone on for that, extra 30 seconds. I didn't realize that it was, that freaking close. Either way, moving on. At the front entrance of AH Tokyo General Hospital, Kusunoki Yua stared without making any rustle at the view that was beyond the automatic doors. She'd had no choice but to head outside when Detective Bond told her, "Go home right this instant." But she was so concerned about him, she couldn't move from that spot. Pursuing an unidentified figure, Bond had vanished into the hospital's upper floors. Though less than 3 minutes had passed since then, Yua studied the lobby, wondering if he would return. After Bond went off to the hospital alone, shaking off Momose's attempts to stop her, Yua had chased after him in order to come closer to the real criminal and to the truth about her sister's death, if only by a step. The person who had sent a Bond threatening phone calls saying back out, and who had abducted his junior, apparently someone called Suwa, that person was in all likelihood the one who had killed her sister Mia. Yua had a hunch that such was the case, so she hadn't been able to fully hold back the impulse driving her forward. Regardless of how thoroughly Bond had warned her it'll be dangerous to get involved with this case, she'd come all the way here. But then, it wasn't as if Yua could accomplish anything simply by having come here. In the end, she was no more than a powerless high school girl. Yua anticipated that Bond would return in high style, having collared the culprit. When he did, she'd have her chance to question the criminal in person. "Why did you have to kill my sister?" It was the question Yua wanted to ask, no matter what. Right then, she abruptly sensed a gaze. Uneasy, Yua surveyed her surroundings. 2 hours had yet to pass since sundown, but the hospital's front entrance was uncannily quiet. Close beside it was an off-hours entrance. It doubled as a place for the reception of emergency patients, but even there, she could sense no human presence. Near the side of the hospital, a train decelerated as it ran along, but few cars drove down the wide road in front of the hospital, and there were 0 pedestrians. A sandwich between Shibuya, the city that doesn't sleep, and Shinjuku, this place was akin to the darkness born from 2 brilliant lights. Nowhere could she see someone who might be a source of the gaze. Resting a hand upon her breast to help tamp down her nervousness, Yua let out a small breath. Next, she cast her eyes unmindfully at the hospital. A lone girl stood there. The lights around the hospital entrance had already gone out, leaving it dim. Despite that, the girl's form floated up out of the darkness with a terrible clarity.
Mia-chan.
Yua murmured unthinkingly. She knew it was impossible, but she couldn't keep her voice from coming out. The girl's figure looked exactly the same as hers, and exactly the same as her younger twin sister, who was no longer in this world. Moreover, the girl was wearing familiar-looking clothing. They were, without a doubt, her little sister's clothes. When she thought that perhaps she was seeing a ghost, she experienced a terror great enough to make all the downy hair on her body stand on end. The girl abruptly turned on her heel, heading for the automatic doors at the hospital building entrance. As she approached them, the automatic doors quietly opened. She wasn't a ghost. Yua was dumbfounded. She instantly broke into a run and went toward the hospital entrance, chasing after the girl. Perhaps because lights out time had already gone by, the hospital building interior was even more deathly quiet than outside. Each time Yua took a step, the sound of her shoes echoed far down the hallway. It had been the same in the outpatient building, but the excessive silence made it seem even eerier. The girl's presence had disappeared in the direction of the upper floors, as she heard something resembling faint laughter as well. Like a scene right out of a ghost story. Oh, agreed. Maybe don't chase after the ghost of your dead little sister. Yua thought to herself as she slowly, step by step, climbed the stairs with great care. She came out on the second floor. She looked down the hallway, but no one was there after all. But when she became dubious, suspecting it of having been a hallucination. Yep. Yua, you're gonna get murdered by a ghost. Calling it now. She heard a female laughter from the floor above. That voice, that manner of laughing, Yua had heard them countless times in the past. Upon ascending to the third floor, Yua glanced at the corridor, and there stood a girl with the same face as her. One of the 5 to die in the first New Gen case, the group dive. Her sister, who was supposed to have died 2 months ago. Okay, so the New Gen cases are on what, 6? I think was the last time we were told. I think it was like 6 or 7, but I lean more towards 6. Apparently this has only been going on for 2 months? Really? I feel like that's a little quick to be already on, kill 6 or 7, whichever one it is. Like I said, I lean more towards 6, but I might be misremembering. Kusunoki Mia stood there, and there was no denying the tangibility of her existence.
So.
You don't say. Yua took off her glasses and rubbed her eyes, but Mia remained there even after she put them back on.
Mia-chan, nano?
Oh, you're gonna get murdered by a ghost. A voice so clear she couldn't think of it as an auditory hallucination. That expression of hers, with an invisible smile. She was the very same Mia from Yua's memories. And Mia had always been like that. She'd often sneered that way to make herself out to be the bad guy.
Mia-chan. 本当に私がミアであなたがユアだと思う?
Oh shit.
どういうこと? もし逆だったら?
Oh.
あなたはミア。死んだのはユア。殺したのはあなた。
Oh. It seems like a Lifetime movie.
何を言っているの?
We're setting up for a Lifetime movie.
あなたは親に愛される姉が疎ましくてネットで殺人を依頼したのよ。しかも自殺に見せかけるように見ず知らずの4人も一緒に飛び降りさせた。
Oh shit.
あなたは姉になりすまして妹の死を悲しみ涙を流しているふりをしながらこれまで姉が独占していた親の愛を手に入れて心の中ではほくそ笑んでいる。
You done talking? Yeah? Great. As I was about to say, assuming that the ghost of Mia/Yua is telling the truth, which there's obviously no guarantee that that is the case. But nonetheless, assuming that this, what can only be really described as a ghost, is telling the truth, this is an interesting connection. That the person we've been referring to as Yua potentially has some sort of connection to the new gen cases. And not just because, one of their family members was somebody who got killed as a result.
違うわ。私はユアよ。誰がそれを証明するの？私はユアのはず。でも、確信が持てない。私を、私だと証明するものって、何？顔？名前？記憶？
Not really. If you're identical twins, face doesn't help. Name really doesn't help, because that's just a case of you claiming you are who you say you are. But unless there's something else that can actually, with some degree of certainty agreed upon to confirm that claim, you can say you are whoever the hell you want. And memories, I guess, but if you're identical twins, you probably also did a lot of stuff together, so that's not super useful.
自分のことなのに。自分で自分を証明するなんて不可能よ。私がミアだっていう可能性もあるの。あなたはいろいろと調べていたじゃない。多重人格、浮遊病、記憶捏造、それから妄想。
The matters she herself had researched up until now were what thrust at her the reality of how memories, or else recollections, were such ambiguous things. She ceased to understand herself. What was she? Yua held her head and shook it like a child throwing a tantrum.
あなたは誰？
Yua, who pretended to be a good girl and automatically received their parents' praise and affection. Mia, who pretended to be a bad girl and actively earned their parents' dislike and looked upon her older sister with envy and loathing, though she had brought it all upon herself.
さあ、私も。
Mia, or perhaps Yua, began walking soundlessly, as though to lead the way for Yua, or perhaps Mia.
私と同じ目に遭いなさい。
Oh shit, they're gonna jump off the roof. Yua and Mia. Monozygotic twins with identical faces. The boundary between them was becoming unclear. Standing upright in the darkness, the vast boxes of two buildings. But compared to the Shinjuku skyscrapers that towered nearby, they were just like children gazing up at adults. The roof of the hospital building, Yua had arrived there, lured on by Mia. Who knew whose work it might have been, but one corner of the fence soared around it, contained a broken area large enough for a single person to pass through. Yua and Mia, having ventured through that broken spot to the other side of the fence, stood at the edge of the roof. Directly in front of them was the outpatient building. Since it was shorter than the hospital wing, they could take its rooftop garden in at a glance. That said, it wasn't illuminated, so Yua wouldn't be able to tell even if someone were there. The wind was strong up on the roof. That strong wind made Yua and Mia's long, soft hair and the sleeves of their clothing flutter furiously.
私たちはもともと一つだったんだから。
Oh shit.
また戻るだけ。一歩を踏み出せば。
Or don't.
あなたは私になる。
Don't think that's how it works. Empty-eyed, Yua mechanically repeated emotionless words. Spreading out her arms as though to keep her balance, she held her ground against the vigor of the wind blowing up at her. Close by her, spreading her arms out in the same way as Yua, Mia looked in her direction and smiled.
耐える必要なんてないよ。あなたは私の痛みを知らなくちゃならない。さあ、飛んで。そうすれば、私もあなたも同じ痛みを共有するわ。私は、どっちなの？私、あなた。それを聞いても意味はないわ。どっちにしたって、あなたは飛ぶ。
All vestiges of hesitation vanished from Yua as she began to take a single step forward. A gunshot tore through the moonless night. Okay, so this is presumably taking place at the same time where Bon is killed by Sua. Yua had came back to herself with a gasp, and looking down at her feet, she let out a cry. She went dizzy, faced with the height of the place where she had come to stand of her own accord. She lost her balance and seemed about to fall off. She desperately reached for the fence at her back and avoided plummeting down by clinging to it. She had heard the gunshot from the roof of the outpatient building. She turned her head again in its direction. She could just barely make out human shapes in the circular clearing at the center of the rooftop garden. There were two of them. One lay collapsed and the other stood beside him.
Bon-san.
Had that detective shot somebody to death? Or had somebody shot him to death?
何をしてるの？どうして私と同じ痛みを味わおうとしないの？そんなの卑怯よ。ずるいわ。
Not how it works?
ミヤちゃん。違うわ。私はユアよ。ユアは、私。ミヤはあなた。あなたは一体、何なの？私はあなたの望んだもの。あなたは私の望んだもの。
Mia made a grab for her. She put both hands to Yua's neck and squeezed them tighter. A powerful pressure on her throat. She was losing the ability to breathe. We're gonna get murdered by the ghost of our maybe identical little sister. Mia wasn't a ghost. She definitely had a physical body. She was strangling Yua by the neck. That don't mean you're not a ghost.
お願い。今日ぐらい私のお願いを聞いて。いつも我慢してきたんだから。
Yua's sight went red. Her hands wandered in the air, but they couldn't grasp anything. She was going to be killed. Faced by the extremity of that terror, Yua threw her whole body into the struggle to shake Mia off her, using a strength she hadn't known she possessed. But Mia was strong as well, and Yua simply couldn't compete. Even her thoughts began to go red. It felt like her consciousness had been covered by a glob of blood. And she shook her head violently. Her glasses fell off. A bystander would no longer have been able to tell Yua and Mia apart. The results could freely determine who had killed who. If Yua died, all Mia would have to do was become her. If Mia died, all Yua would have to do was become her. Resignation gradually spread through Yua's heart. The hatred-filled face of Mia, or else Yua, before her. Not wanting to see it, she turned her face away. What came flying into her redded field of sight was a planting. The flowers that brought color to the rooftop garden. She had the sense that a dissimilar shadow was mixed in with those flowers. It may have been a hallucination, one she was seeing because she'd lost her glasses. But she could no longer breathe. In the midst of her suffering rose up a faint serenity. Well, she thought to herself that maybe it would be alright to let everything go like this. The demands of her bodily instincts insisting she didn't want to die, rejected that serenity. The same instinct made her stretch a hand toward that out-of-place shadow. The distance between her and the planting was roughly 2 meters. Under these circumstances, it would be impossible for her to touch it when she reached for it. Despite that, her fingertips brushed something hard and cold. She grasped it, all but unconsciously. A split second later, Kusunoki Yua's dwindling consciousness went clear, as though a fog had been lifted away from it. And she got her D-sword. An intense, invisible impact burst forth. A red light resembling flower petals danced there, sending the twins, one of whom had almost been lying on top of the other, flying apart. Coughing, Yua swayed to her feet, looked at what she was gripping, and widened her eyes. It was a single sword. All too elegant. All too immaculate. All too delicate and easily damaged. Oh, I wasn't even reading what was there. So all too keen, all too valiant, all too profound and unfamiliar. And beautiful enough to invoke tears. That which lay in her hand. What it reminded Yua of were Ayase's sword, which she had previously seen in the subway, and the sword belonging to the girl of whom Ban had spoken, Senna.
今のは何?
Blown away by the mysterious shockwave from before, almost buried in one of the plantings, Mia came crawling out, pressing down on her head.
あなたは何をしたの? 私はミヤちゃん、私やっとわかったわ。どうしてここまで一生懸命あなたの死の真相を調べていたのか。私を殺そうとしたの？私はまた殺されるところだったの？結局私はあなたが怖かったのよ。当てつけに死なれたと思ったの。あなたがわからなかったの。あなたが死んだ理由は私のせいじゃないって証明して安心したかった。最低のお姉ちゃんね。どうして死んでくれないのよ。
Nothing she said would get through to Mia anymore. Their two hearts, which had begun as one and the same, were now perfectly estranged and would never return. Mia seized at her again, recalling her previous agony and trembling in fear. Yua... A flash. The sword in her hand traced a sharp locus. It clove the ghost in half. Mia stopped moving, wearing an expression of astonishment. She groped at the wound carved from her lower left abdomen to her right shoulder. No blood emerged.
ミヤちゃんは2ヶ月前に死にました。それならあなたは誰なんですか?
She's you. Innumerable particles, large enough to be visible, seeped out of Mia's body. Enveloped in foam, her flesh gradually crumbled, and its outlines faded, and metamorphosized into something separate. Yua looked at it with disbelieving eyes. What had last appeared in Mia's stead was a stout man. He wore a denim shirt and dirty jeans with a rucksack on his back. A man Yua had never seen before.
誰? あなた誰? どうしてミヤちゃんの姿に? どうやって?
Bewildered, Yua retreated with this sword still in hand. The man, too, appeared flustered, since he probably hadn't imagined being exposed as himself.
お前こそなんでまさかこのガキギガロマニアックスか聞いてないぞくそどうしたら
Paying no heed to gravity, it flew all but horizontally. By the time the man turned to look behind him, it had already pierced the rucksack he was wearing. And from within that rucksack gushed a pale flash of light. The man went taut, as though he'd received an electric shock, and toppled over on his face with the whites of his eyes showing. Bubbles frothed from his mouth, and he convulsed. That which had stabbed his rucksack. A sword with beautiful curves, similar to the one Yua had obtained moments ago.
これ
She remembered seeing this sword somewhere. She had spotted it once before. A single human presence approached her. Yua raised her head. She who emerged out of the dimness.
何事かと思ったらこんな騒ぎになっていたのね。
Dun dun dun.
岸本さん
Expressionless, ISA glanced at the sword Yua held.
感じる大いなる意志を。私がこの病院に居続けた意味はこういうことだったんだわ。
Right, that's the reason you had to stay here. It's not because you're nutso. ISA picked up Yua's falling glasses, knelt in front of Yua, who had sunk down there dazedly, and looked into her face. Her thin fingers gently brushed Yua's hair back and softly placed the glasses on her.
君もグラジオールの黒騎士だったのね。
And she gave her an ephemeral smile.
僕を殺してくれないか。
Okay, so we just transitioned to a new scene. I have 3 minutes left on the clock. I don't think that scene is going to finish in those, in a somewhat reasonable time frame within that sort of 3-ish minute mark. So we're going to go ahead and cut this episode a little bit short. I will see you all next time. A quick reminder, if you want to support the channel, the 2 major ways to do that, especially because this game doesn't have, affiliate links or anything, is to support the channel either via Patreon on a monthly basis with, whatever, you're willing to part with to help the channel out. Makes it so that I can, more easily afford to purchase games, upgrade my computer, things of that nature. I've been wanting to do a number of upgrades to my computer, not just for the channel, but also actually for the side project I've been working on. But I haven't been able to do that, largely because of, just graphics card prices being absolutely ridiculous. And practically no availability, even on the off chance that you can get your hands on, or rather that you can find a reasonably priced graphics card being sold. And so I've had to hold off on doing some of these upgrades that I, like I said, wanted to do. But yeah, so that will be it for this part. If you want to know what's going on with the channel, I highly recommend that you join my Discord. That is my go-to place for posting about the channel. If there's any potential interruptions to my schedule, whether it be recording or streaming, that's where I'll typically make the post. But until next time, a goodbye and farewell.